Retro Rewind, the Sega Master System. Welcome to Retro Rewind, the show that plugs you back into the pixels, polygons, and personalities that shaped the world of gaming. Today, we're dialing our time machine back to the mid-1980s. It was an era of big hair, neon colors, and a single, undisputed king of the video game world. A cheerful plumber from Brooklyn had conquered the living room, and his name was the Law. But in the shadow of this giant, a challenger was being forged. It was a machine with superior technology, a sleek design, and a library of games that shone with a unique arcade-like brilliance. It fought a battle it could not win in North America, yet became a cultural phenomenon in other parts of the world, outliving its own successor and surviving for decades. This is the story of Sega's first true shot at the title, a console of quiet triumphs and catastrophic failures. Today, we rewind to the era of the Sega Master System. Introduction: the first challenger. To understand the story of the Master System, you must first understand the landscape it was born into, a world rebuilt from ruins. The great video game crash of 1983 had turned the once booming American home console market into a toxic wasteland. Retailers, burned by an avalanche of low-quality, unsellable games, refused to stock anything that looked like a video game console. The industry wasn't just wounded, for all intents and purposes, it was dead. Then came the savior. In 1985, Nintendo, a Japanese company with a long history in toys and playing cards, performed a miracle. Through a stroke of marketing genius, they disguised their Famicom console as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, an entertainment system, not a video game console, and bundled it with a toy robot named ROB to sneak it past wary retailers into toy aisles. It was a Trojan horse, and inside was a game that would change the world: Super Mario Bros. The success was absolute and immediate. Nintendo didn't just revive the market, it became the market. By 1986, Nintendo held a near-total monopoly on home video games in North America and Japan. Its policies were famously strict, locking third-party developers into exclusive contracts that forbade them from releasing their games on competing systems for 2 years. This iron grip ensured a steady stream of quality games for the NES, while simultaneously starving any potential rival of the software it needed to survive. Into this David and Goliath scenario stepped Sega, a company not of the living room, but of the arcade. Sega's DNA was forged in the noisy, electrifying world of coin-op machines. While Nintendo was making family-friendly platformers, Sega was creating visceral, high-speed experiences like Outrun and Space Harrier. When the video game crash hit, Sega, like many arcade companies, saw the collapsing home market as an opportunity. With its expertise in creating powerful hardware, Sega knew it could build a better machine than the NES. And it did. The Sega Mark III, released in Japan in 1985 and redesigned for the West as the Sega Master System in 1986, was by almost every technical metric a superior console. It had a faster processor, a broader color palette, and better sound capabilities. It was sleek, black, and futuristic, a stark contrast to Nintendo's utilitarian gray box. It was a technically brilliant machine that should have been a worthy contender. But in the console business, technology is only half the battle. The story of the Master System is a brutal lesson in the importance of marketing, third-party support, and business strategy. It's the story of a console that won the hardware war but lost the software war. A machine that suffered a humiliating defeat in North America and Japan, yet found astonishing, long-lasting success in Europe and Brazil, where it became a cultural icon. This is the story of Sega's first true shot at the title, a console of quiet triumphs and catastrophic failures. Chapter 1: The Phoenix and the Giant. To understand the Master System, we must first go back to its Japanese roots and the machine it was born from, the SG-1000. In the early 1980s, Sega was one of the undisputed kings of the arcade, with revenues exceeding $214 million by 1982. But the video game crash of 1983 sent a shockwave that was felt even in the coin-op world. With arcade profits slumping, Sega's parent company, the American conglomerate Gulf and Western, began to divest its assets. Amid this uncertainty, Hayao Nakayama, a shrewd and ambitious executive within Sega's Japanese division, championed a bold new strategy. Sega should enter the home console market. Leveraging its vast experience in designing arcade hardware, Sega could create a powerful home machine. This led to the development of the SG-1000, Sega's first ever home video game console. In a remarkable coincidence of history, the SG-1000 launched in Japan on July 15, 1983, the very same day that Nintendo launched its Famicom. This fateful day marked the official beginning of the Sega-Nintendo rivalry. Though it was a capable machine for its time, the SG-1000 was technically inferior to the Famicom, which boasted custom-designed chips that allowed for smoother scrolling and more impressive graphics. The SG-1000 and its later revision, the SG-1002, sold modestly but were ultimately overshadowed by the Famicom's meteoric rise. Sega, however, was not deterred. The company's engineers, led by Hideki Sato, immediately began work on a successor. Their goal was to create a machine that could not only compete with the Famicom, but surpass it in every way. This new console was the Sega Mark III. Forging a superior machine, the Sega Mark III. Released in Japan in October 1985, the Sega Mark III was a significant leap forward in technology. It was a true 8-bit powerhouse designed to correct the architectural shortcomings of its predecessor and take direct aim at the Famicom. The power of color. The Mark III's Video Display Processor, or VDP, was a custom chip derived from a Texas Instruments design. It was capable of displaying 64 colors on screen at once from a palette of 256. This was a massive advantage over the Famicom and NES, which was limited to just 25 on-screen colors from a palette of 54. This gave Mark III games a vibrant, rich look that many NES titles appeared washed out by comparison. A faster heartbeat. The console was powered by a Xilag Z80A CPU clocked at 3.58 MHz. While this was the same family of processor used in many older systems, it was faster and more efficient than the Rico 203 in the Famicom, allowing for more complex game logic without slowdown. Advanced storage. The Mark III featured 2 cartridge slots. One was for standard game cartridges, while the other was for smaller, credit card-sized Sega cards. These cards were a cheaper storage medium for simpler games, offering a lower price point for consumers. Optional upgrades. From the beginning, the Mark III was designed to be expandable. It supported optional add-ons like the FM sound unit, which added a powerful Yamaha YM2413 sound chip, providing 9 channels of high-quality FM synthesis audio that blew away the Famicom's simple pulse wave sounds. The Mark III was a success in Japan. Not on the scale of the Famicom, but it established Sega as a credible number 2 in the console space. It was clear, however, that the real battle would be fought in North America, the market that Nintendo had single-handedly resurrected. For its Western debut, the Mark III would need a new name and a new look. Crossing the Pacific, the birth of the Master System. In 1986, Sega of America was established to bring Sega's new console to the West. The futuristic white design of the Mark III was replaced with a sleek black and red shell, a design that would become iconic in its own right. The name was changed to the Sega Master System. The Sega card slot was retained, though it would be removed in later cheaper models, and the console launched in North America in June 1986 for $200. The Master System was a technically superior machine to the NES. It was more powerful, its games were more colorful, and it came bundled with impressive titles like Hang On and Safari Hunt, a light gun game to compete with Nintendo's Duck Hunt. On paper, it had everything it needed to be a serious challenger. But it was entering a market that was no longer a fair fight. It was Nintendo's kingdom, and Nintendo had built a fortress around it. The Master System's launch marked the first time a Japanese console manufacturer would directly challenge Nintendo's dominance on American soil. The stage was set for a battle that Sega was technically prepared for, but commercially and strategically it was hopelessly outgunned. Retro Rewind, the Sega Master System.
Chapter 2. The Walls of the Kingdom. The Sega Master System launched in North America with a clear and demonstrable hardware advantage over the NES. But technology alone does not win a console war. The system's failure to gain a significant foothold in the American market can be attributed to 2 main factors, both stemming from the iron-fisted rule of Nintendo. a crippling lack of third-party software, and a series of catastrophic marketing and distribution blunders. Nintendo's iron grip, the third-party problem. In the wake of the 1983 crash, which was largely blamed on a flood of low-quality third-party games, Nintendo established a set of licensing policies that were nothing short of draconian. To develop games for the NES, a publisher had to agree to a set of now infamous terms. Exclusivity. Any game released for the NES could not be released on a competing console for a period of 2 years. Manufacturing control. Nintendo would be the sole manufacturer of all NES cartridges. Developers had to pay Nintendo upfront for a minimum order of cartridges, assuming all the financial risk. Censorship. All games were subject to Nintendo's strict content guidelines, which prohibited excessive violence, religious themes, and any other material deemed unsuitable for its family-friendly image. Limited releases. Nintendo limited its third-party licensees to releasing a maximum of 5 games per year. These policies were a double-edged sword. They ensured a baseline level of quality and prevented the market from being flooded, which helped rebuild consumer confidence. But they also created a virtual prison for developers. The 2-year exclusivity clause was the critical blow for the Master System. It meant that the most popular third-party games of the era, titles from giants like Capcom, Mega Man, Konami, Castlevania, Contra, and Square, Final Fantasy, were legally barred from appearing on Sega's console. As a result, the Master System's library was almost entirely dependent on Sega's own internal development studios and a small handful of second-tier licensees. While Sega's developers were incredibly talented, they simply could not produce the volume or variety of games needed to compete. The NES was a tidal wave of recognizable hits. The Master System was a small, curated collection of excellent but often unknown titles. For the average American kid, the choice was simple: the console with Mega Man, Contra, and Final Fantasy, or the one without. A marketing catastrophe, the Tonka fiasco. While the third-party problem was a massive hurdle, it was a disastrous business decision by Sega of America that sealed the Master System's fate. In 1987, Sega, struggling to get its new console into major retail chains, decided to hand over the North American marketing and distribution rights to the toy company Tonka. The logic seemed sound at the time. Nintendo had successfully positioned the NES as a toy, and Tonka was a giant in that industry, with deep connections to retailers like Toys R Us. The hope was that Tonka could use its muscle to get the Master System the shelf space it desperately needed. The reality was a complete and utter catastrophe. Tonka had zero experience with video games and electronic entertainment. They fundamentally misunderstood the market and the product. Their marketing campaigns were generic and poorly targeted, completely failing to communicate the Master System's technical advantages over the NES. The advertising was forgettable, lacking the aggressive edge that would later define the Sega brand. Worse still, Tonka mismanaged the logistics of the business. They failed to effectively lobby for the localization of popular Japanese and European games, leaving many of the system's best titles unreleased in America. During a global shortage of EEPROM chips, a key component in game cartridges, Tonka was outmaneuvered by Nintendo, which used its market power to secure the lion's share of the available supply, leaving the Master System with crippling software shortages. The Tonka deal was a fatal wound. It robbed Sega of control over its own destiny in its most important market. While Sega was a focused, ambitious video game company, its American fortunes were now in the hands of a distracted toy company that was facing its own financial troubles. By 1988, Nintendo controlled an astonishing 83% of the North American video game market. The Master System was a commercial failure, an afterthought in a world completely dominated by Mario. The first challenge had been a rout. Chapter 3: The European Oasis and the Brazilian Kingdom. While the Master System was being crushed under the weight of Nintendo's dominance in North America and Japan, a completely different story was unfolding across the Atlantic. In Europe and South America, where Nintendo was slower to establish a foothold, the Master System didn't just compete, it thrived. For millions of gamers in these regions, the 8-bit era was not defined by the gray box of Nintendo, but by the sleek black lines of Sega. Europe's 8-bit champion. Several factors contributed to the Master System's success in Europe. Nintendo's European launch of the NES was delayed and poorly managed, creating a window of opportunity that Sega, through various local distributors, expertly exploited. Furthermore, the European market was more fragmented and diverse. Home computers like the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 had been immensely popular, creating an audience that was receptive to a wider variety of gaming experiences beyond Nintendo's walled garden. In the UK, the Master System was distributed by Mastertronic, a company known for budget-priced computer games. This association helped position the Master System as a more affordable and accessible console. Across the continent, the Master System built a massive and loyal following. Crucially, the European library was far richer than its American counterpart. Many games that Tonka had failed to localize for the US market were released in Europe to great acclaim. Titles like the platformer Psycho Fox, the action RPG Golvelius Valley of Doom, and the original Phantasy Star became beloved classics. A host of games were even developed specifically for the European market by British and French studios, further diversifying the library. For an entire generation of European gamers, Sega, not Nintendo, was the dominant brand. This deep-rooted brand loyalty would prove immensely valuable, giving Sega a huge head start when it came time to launch the Mega Drive, which was the European name for the Genesis, which would go on to dominate the 16-bit era in the region. Brazil, a legacy unmatched. Nowhere was the Master System's success more profound and long-lasting than in Brazil. The story of Sega in Brazil is the story of a partnership with a local electronics company called Tectoy. In 1989, Tectoy secured the exclusive rights to manufacture and distribute Sega products in Brazil. At the time, Brazil's government imposed heavy tariffs on imported electronics, making consoles like the NES prohibitively expensive. Tectoy's strategy of local manufacturing allowed them to sell the Master System at a much more competitive price. But their success went far beyond simple economics. Tectoy treated the Master System not as a relic, but as a living platform. For decades, Tectoy continued to produce and sell new versions of the Master System. They localized hundreds of games, often changing character sprites to feature popular Brazilian cartoon characters to increase their appeal. More astonishingly, Tectoy developed and published brand new Brazil-exclusive Master System games, long after the console was discontinued everywhere else in the world. This included downported versions of 16-bit hits like Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat III, technical marvels that pushed the 8-bit hardware to its absolute limits. The Master System became a cultural institution in Brazil. It was the people's console, an affordable and accessible gateway to gaming for millions. Its successor, the Mega Drive, was also immensely popular, but the Master System's legacy is unique. Tectoy continues to produce simplified, plug-and-play versions of the console to this day, a testament to its incredible and enduring popularity. The Master System's performance in Brazil is a powerful example of how regional market conditions and a smart local partner can create a legacy that defies global trends. For Sega, the failures in America and Japan were bitter, but the triumphs in Europe and Brazil proved that their hardware had the potential to win hearts and minds if only given a fighting chance.
Chapter 4. The Arsenal of a Contender. A console is only as good as its games, and despite its struggles in North America, the Sega Master System boasted a library of titles that were vibrant, diverse, and technically impressive.
Freed from the constraints of Nintendo's strict content policies and benefiting from Sega's arcade heritage, the Master System's library had a distinct character. Its best games shone with bright colors, featured innovative gameplay, and often felt like miniature arcade experiences, a clear contrast to many of the slower-paced titles on the NES. Arcade conversions, bringing the coin-op home. Sega's most obvious strength was its ability to convert its own arcade hits. The Master System became the premier destination for faithful ports of Sega's coin-op classics. Hang-On, often bundled with the console, this port of Yu Suzuki's groundbreaking motorcycle racing game was a brilliant showcase. While it lacked the deluxe moving cabinet of the arcade, it captured the thrilling sense of speed and was a world away from the simplistic racing games on other systems. Outrun, another Yu Suzuki masterpiece. The Master System port of Outrun was a technical achievement. It managed to recreate the game's branching paths, iconic Ferrari Testarossa, and laid-back sense of a European road trip. The 8-bit renditions of its legendary soundtrack became instant classics. Space Harrier. This fast-paced third-person rail shooter was a testament to the Master System's processing power. The game's checkered floors and fantasy landscapes flew by at a blistering pace, creating an intense 3D-like experience that the NES could not replicate. Afterburner. Porting this jet combat game, known for its chaotic missile-dodging action, was an ambitious task. The Master System version was a valiant effort that delivered a fast and playable experience, cementing the console's reputation for arcade action. The Alex Kidd Saga, a mascot before the hedgehog. Before Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega's de facto mascot was a big-eared, jumpsuit-wearing boy named Alex Kidd. His adventures spanned several games on the Master System, the most famous of which was Alex Kidd in Miracle World. Originally released in 1986, Miracle World was built into the hardware of later models of the Master System, making it the first game millions of players experienced. It was a quirky and memorable platformer that stood apart from Super Mario Bros. Instead of jumping on enemies, Alex Kidd dispatched them with a powerful punch. The game featured varied levels that included swimming and piloting vehicles like a motorbike and a pedicopter. Its most distinctive feature was replacing traditional boss battles with games of rock, paper, scissors, a bizarre and unforgettable design choice. While Alex Kidd never achieved the iconic status of Mario, Miracle World remains one of the most beloved and defining titles in the Master System library. Masterpieces of the 8-bit era. Beyond the arcade ports and mascot platformers, the Master System was home to a host of original titles that are now regarded as classics of the 8-bit era. Phantasy Star, perhaps the single most important game on the Master System. Released in 1987 in Japan, this was Sega's answer to Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. It was a revolutionary RPG that was years ahead of its time. It featured a compelling science fantasy storyline centered around a female protagonist, Alice Landale, a rarity at the time. The game's most impressive feature was its first-person dungeon-crawling sequences, which used fluid, fast-scrolling 3D-like graphics that were simply mind-blowing for an 8-bit console. With its huge world, engaging story, and incredible technical feats, Phantasy Star is not just one of the best Master System games, it is one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap. This title is widely considered to be one of the pinnacles of 8-bit game design. A unique blend of action RPG and platforming, the game saw the player character cursed to transform into various animal forms, Lizard Man, Mouse Man, Piranha Man, etc., each with unique abilities needed to traverse the large, interconnected world. Its non-linear Metroidvania style of exploration, gorgeous graphics, and incredible soundtrack made it a masterpiece that was far more ambitious than most of its contemporaries. Pyco Fox, a vibrant and fast-paced platformer that felt like a spiritual precursor to Sonic the Hedgehog. Players could switch between different animal characters, each with a different skill, the high-jumping monkey, the long-jumping tiger, and used a companion character, Birdfly, to deflect projectiles. Its emphasis on building momentum to race through levels set it apart from the more methodical platforming of Mario. Golvalius, Valley of Doom, a sprawling action-adventure game that combined top-down exploration reminiscent of The Legend of Zelda with side-scrolling action stages. It was a huge and ambitious title with a memorable soundtrack and a deep world to explore. These games and many other hidden gems like the shoot-'em-up R-Type and the platformer Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse proved that the Master System had a library that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the NES's best. The tragedy is that due to Nintendo's licensing stranglehold and Tonka's marketing failures, many of these masterpieces never reached the wide audience they deserved in North America, becoming beloved classics primarily for gamers in Europe and Brazil. Chapter 5. A Legacy of Lessons Learned. The Sega Master System was, by the metrics that mattered most in the 1980s, a failure in the key markets of Japan and North America. It failed to break Nintendo's monopoly and was relegated to a distant, barely relevant third place, behind Atari in the United States. But its story is not one of simple defeat. The Master System's struggle was a crucial learning experience for Sega, a crucible in which the strategies, philosophies, and even the resentments that would fuel the Genesis and the 16-bit console war were forged. Its legacy is not found in its sales charts, but in the profound impact it had on the company that created it. The 3 foundational lessons. The failure of the Master System in North America taught Sega 3 vital, painful lessons that directly shaped the Genesis strategy. Hardware is not enough. The Master System was demonstrably more powerful than the NES, but this technical superiority meant nothing in the face of a massive software deficit. Sega learned that a console is defined by its games. This led to the aggressive courting of third-party developers for the Genesis, most notably the landmark deal with Electronic Arts, and a renewed focus on creating a system seller exclusive, a game so compelling it could sell the hardware all by itself. You cannot outsource your ambition. The decision to hand over distribution to Tonka was a catastrophic, hands-off approach that ceded control of Sega's destiny. Sega learned that to compete in the cutthroat American market, they had to be present, active, and in control. This directly led to the establishment of a strong, autonomous Sega of America under the leadership of Michael Katz and later Tom Kalinske, who were empowered to create marketing and strategy tailored specifically for the American audience. You must define your brand. The Master System had no clear identity. Its marketing was generic, failing to articulate why a consumer should choose it over the NES. Out of this failure came the brilliant, aggressive marketing for the Genesis. Sega realized it couldn't be another Nintendo. It had to be the anti-Nintendo. Slogans like "Genesis does what Nintendo don't" and the focus on a cooler, older demographic were born directly from the Master System's inability to differentiate itself in the way Mario had. The creation of a mascot like Sonic, fast, cool, and rebellious, was a direct response to the failure of the more generic Alex Kidd to capture the public imagination in the same way Mario had. The seeds of a global powerhouse. While a failure in some regions, the Master System's immense success in Europe and Brazil was a monumental victory. It established the Sega brand as a household name in these territories, creating a massive, loyal fan base that was ready and eager to adopt Sega's next console. The dominant market share the Mega Drive Genesis enjoyed in Europe and Brazil during the 16-bit era was built entirely on the foundation the Master System had laid. It turned Sega from a primarily Japanese-American-focused company into a truly global brand. An enduring cult classic. Today, the Sega Master System is remembered fondly by retro gaming enthusiasts. Its sleek design, its library of hidden gems, and its status as the underdog console have given it a lasting appeal. For many gamers, particularly outside of North America, it was their first and most beloved console. The vibrant colors and unique arcade feel of its best games give it a distinct personality that still shines through. It was the first challenger to the throne, and while it failed to claim the crown, its struggle paved the way for the war that would follow. The Master System may have lost the battle, but in doing so it gave Sega the experience, the motivation, and the anger it needed to one day win the war.
Chapter 6. Under the Hood. The Silicon Heart of the Underdog. To truly appreciate the tragedy and the triumph of the Master System, we have to peel back that sleek black plastic casing and look at the silicon heart beating underneath. In the console wars, we often talk about bits as if they are the only metric that matters. But the war between the NES and the Master System wasn't just about 8 bits.
It was about architecture, design philosophy, and the specific choices engineers made that defined the look and feel of a generation. The Master System was, in many ways, a Frankenstein's monster of arcade parts and off-the-shelf components stitched together with brilliance. While the NES had custom-built wondrous toy, the Master System was a workman's machine, built to get the job done with power and efficiency. The brain, the Zilog Z80A. If you were a computer geek in the 1980s, this chip was royalty. It was the same processor that powered the ZX Spectrum, the MSX Standard, and the arcade version of Pac-Man. Clocked at 3.58 MHz, it was a significant step up from the Recode 203 found in the NES, which ran at roughly 1.79 MHz. This raw speed advantage meant the Master System could handle more calculations per second. In practical terms, this allowed for more complex enemy patterns, faster game logic, and fewer instances of the dreaded slowdown that plagued frantic NES titles. When you played a game like Sonic the Hedgehog on the 8-bit Master System, released late in its life, the game moved with a fluidity that simply shouldn't have been possible on 8-bit hardware. That was the Z80A flexing its muscles. The choice of the Z80 was also a strategic masterstroke for backward compatibility. It was the same chip used in Sega's previous console, the SG-1000. This allowed the Master System to play the entire library of its predecessor, at least in the Japanese Mark III model, providing an instant library of software, albeit dated ones. The eyes, the VDP, and the color revolution. If the CPU was the muscle, the Video Display Processor, VDP, was the soul. The Master System used a custom graphics chip based on the Texas Instruments TMS-9918, a chip famous for powering the ColecoVision. But Sega's engineers didn't just use it, they supercharged it. The most defining characteristic of the Master System was its color palette. The system could display 32 colors on screen simultaneously, 16 for sprites, 16 for backgrounds, from a larger palette of 64 colors. Now compare this to the NES. The NES had a unique, somewhat eccentric color palette of 54 distinct colors, but could only display roughly 25 at once. More importantly, the NES palette was famously muted. Lots of earth tones, weird greens, and desaturated blues. It gave the NES games a distinct gritty or pastel look. The Master System, by contrast, was vibrant. Its palette was rich in primary colors, deep blues, bright reds, and lush greens. This is why Master System games often looked like cartoons. Look at the blue skies in Alex Kidd in Miracle World, or the verdant jungles in Safari Hunt. They pop with a saturation that the NES simply couldn't reproduce. This Sega blue sky became a hallmark of the company's aesthetic, a visual signature that signaled arcade excitement compared to Nintendo's adventure realism. However, the VDP had its Achilles heel. It struggled with hardware scrolling. The NES was built to scroll. Its picture processing unit, PPU, handled the movement of tile maps effortlessly. Which is why Super Mario Bros. Felt so smooth. The Master System's VDP had to be coaxed into scrolling smoothly, particularly vertically. Early titles often had jerky screen transitions or limited scrolling capabilities, a flaw that developers eventually overcame through clever programming tricks, but one that initially made the system feel stiff compared to the fluid motion of Mario. The voice, the tale of two sound chips. Audio is where the history of the Master System splits into two divergent timelines, the tragedy of the West and the symphony of the East. The standard Master System released in North America and Europe used a Texas Instruments SN7649 programmable sound generator. This chip offered 3 square wave channels for tone and 1 white noise channel for percussion or effects. It was functional, catchy, and capable of producing some iconic tunes. The Space Harrier theme is an earworm for the ages. However, it was distinctly beepy. It lacked depth and resonance. But in Japan, the Sega Mark III had a secret weapon. It supported an optional peripheral which was later built into the Japanese Master System redesign called the FM Sound Unit. This unit housed a Yamaha YM2413 chip. FM synthesis, frequency modulation, was the technology used in high-end synthesizers of the 80s. It allowed for metallic, bell-like tones, deep basses, and complex instrument simulations. Games that supported this chip sounded generations ahead of the NES. Example: Phantasy Star. If you played Phantasy Star in America, you heard a charming, if simple, PSG soundtrack. If you played it in Japan with the FM unit, you heard a sweeping, orchestral-style score with resonant bass lines and piercing, emotional highs. The difference was night and day. Sega of America's decision to remove the FM chip support for the Western release to cut costs was a sonic tragedy. It robbed Western gamers of the true atmosphere intended by the developers, leaving the Master System to fight the audio war with one hand tied behind its back against the NES, whose custom sound chip was capable of unique warm wave forms that defined the 8-bit soundscape. Chapter 7: The Gimmicks and the Glory, Peripherals of the Future. In the mid-80s, high-tech peripherals were the ultimate way to convince parents that a video game console was actually a computer or a futuristic entertainment system. Nintendo had robbed the robot and the zapper. Sega, never one to be outdone in the hardware department, answered with accessories that were arguably far superior, even if they failed to catch fire commercially. The light phaser. Elegance in a plastic gun. The Nintendo Zapper is iconic. It's chunky, it's gray or orange, and it makes a satisfying clack sound. It looks like a toy. Sega's answer was the light phaser, and true to Sega's aesthetic, it didn't look like a toy, it looked like a weapon from Battlestar Galactica. Modeled after the Zillion gun from the anime of the same name, which Sega sponsored, the light phaser was sleek, black, and heavy. It had a futuristic handguard and a responsive trigger. It felt like a piece of premium hardware. But it wasn't just about looks. The light phaser was remarkably accurate. Because of the Master System's superior color handling, hit detection flashes could be handled more subtly than the jarring white screens often seen on the NES. The software library for the light phaser was small but mighty. Safari Hunt, the pack-in game. While Duck Hunt had a dog that laughed at you, Safari Hunt had a variety of environments: jungle, lake, forest, and a variety of animals, from ducks to fish to ferocious bears. It was a more diverse and colorful experience. Rescue Mission, a game where you protected a medic cart moving along a track. It utilized the gun for defense rather than just target practice, adding a layer of strategy. Rambo: First Blood Part 2. This was a rare dual control game. You used the control pad to move Rambo and the light phaser to shoot enemies. It was an ambitious, slightly clunky attempt to bring the chaotic violence of the movie to the living room. And the Sega Scope 3D, decades ahead of its time. If you want to understand Sega's obsession with being the next level, look no further than the Sega Scope 3D glasses. Released in 1987, almost a decade before the Virtual Boy and 20 years before the 3D TV craze, Sega brought the active shutter 3D technology to the home. The mechanism was ingenious. The glasses plugged directly into the console via the card slot or a dedicated adapter. The TV would rapidly flicker between two slightly offset images: left eye, right eye, left eye, right eye. The glasses, synchronized with the TV, would darken the left lens when the right image was shown, and vice versa. This happened so fast that the brain merged the images into a single stereoscopic 3D picture. When it worked, it was magical. Maze Hunter 3D, a top-down maze game where the walls seemed to rise out of the floor, creating a genuine sense of depth and claustrophobia. Missile Defense 3D, a light gun game played with the 3D glass.
Chapter 8, The Forgotten Mascots, Before the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is the face of Sega. But Sonic didn't arrive until 1991. For the 5 years prior, the Master System was a stage searching for a star. Sega threw several characters at the wall, hoping one would stick. These are the forgotten heroes of the 8-bit wars. Opa Opa, the sentient spaceship. Before Alex Kidd, there was Opa Opa, the star of Fantasy Zone. Opa Opa was a sentient spaceship with wings and feet. The game, a Q-em-up, was a pastel-colored fever dream of pastel planets and bizarre enemies. Fantasy Zone was a masterclass in risk-reward gameplay. Defeated enemies dropped coins which you could use to buy engine upgrades and better weapons from a shop balloon that would float by. It induced an economy to the shooter genre. Opa Opa was adorable, versatile, and featured in several games, including Fantasy Zone The Maze. But a spaceship, even a cute one, lacks the personality needed to sell lunchboxes. Opa Opa remained a cult favorite, a symbol of Sega's arcade creativity, but he wasn't a Mario killer. Alex Kidd, the Prince of Punch. Sega's most concerted effort to build a mascot was Alex Kidd. As mentioned in the main episode, his debut, Alex Kidd in Miracle World, was brilliant. But the mismanagement of the character that followed is a microcosm of the Master System's broader struggles. Instead of refining the formula of Miracle World, the punch mechanics, the shop system, the vehicles, Sega seemed to have no idea what to do with him. Alex Kidd The Lost Stars, a stripped-down arcade port that removed the exploration and shops, replacing them with a generic shouting runner. Alex Kidd BMX Trial, a strange racing game requiring a special paddle controller. Alex Kidd in High Tech World. This wasn't even a Sega game originally. It was a localization of a Japanese game based on the anime and Mitsuhime. They just swapped the princess sprite for Alex Kidd. The game was a cryptic adventure puzzle game that had nothing to do with his platforming roots. Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, a parody game where Alex dresses as a ninja. Ironically, this was actually a fantastic game, tight controls, great music, but it felt like a side project rather than a flagship title. By the time Sonic arrived, Alex Kidd had been diluted into irrelevance. He was a mascot without a consistent genre or identity, a victim of Sega's experimental but unfocused approach to software development in the late 80s. Wonder Boy, the confusing legacy. If Alex Kidd was the failed mascot, Wonder Boy was the accidental legend. The Wonder Boy series is perhaps the most confusing franchise in video game history due to licensing rights. The original Wonder Boy was a skateboarding riding platformer, but the second Wonder Boy in Monsterland invented the action RPG platformer genre. It introduced buying boots for speed, shield for defense, and magic spells. The masterpiece, Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap, refined this to perfection. As discussed, the transformation mechanics were revolutionary. But here is the twist. Because Sega owned the trademark Wonder Boy, but the developer, Westone, owned the game design, the game was licensed to other companies. Hudson Soft released it on the TurboGrafx-16 as Dragon's Curse. Nintendo released a modified version called Adventure Island. So while Wonder Boy was arguably the best platforming franchise on the Master System, Sega couldn't fully claim it as their own exclusive identity in the same way Nintendo claimed Mario. It was a brilliant series that fragmented across the industry, another missed opportunity for brand consolidation. Chapter 9, The Localization Lab, Lost in Translation. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Master System era is the extreme lengths Sega went to in order to westernize their library.
In the 80s, Japanese culture was not yet the cool cyberpunk export it is today. Publishers believed that American kids wouldn't buy games with anime art styles or references to Japanese food. This led to a phenomenon we'll call the localization lab, where Japanese games were dismantled and rebuilt, often bizarrely, for Western consumption. The Fist of the North Star transformation. In Japan, Hokuto no Ken was a massive anime phenomenon. Sega secured the license and created a violent side-scrolling beat-em-up where the protagonist, Kenshiro, would punch enemies until they exploded. For the US release, Sega didn't have the license, so they created Black Belt. The change, Kenshiro became Riki, the post-apocalyptic setting was vaguely modernized. The bosses, the iconic anime villains, were strangely reskinned. The fat villain Heart became a generic brute. The result, despite the generic branding, Black Belt was a hit. It was visceral, fast, and featured a boss rush structure that was incredibly satisfying. It stands as a prime example of how good gameplay can survive a total branding strip mining. High School Commengaming becomes Waiting for the Bus. One of the weirdest localization stories involves a game called High School Commengaming, based on a slapstick manga about a group of oddball students. When Sega brought it to the West, they didn't just change the sprites, they changed the entire premise. It became Ghost House. The change, the school setting was replaced with a haunted mansion. The students became a vampire hunter. The slapstick items became stakes and crucifixes. The gameplay, the underlying code remained. You still ran around jumping on platforms, but now you are fighting Dracula instead of school bullies. It was a functional game, but the tonal whiplash for anyone who knew the original was severe. The Gangstertown mystery. Sometimes the localization added charm. Gangstertown was a light phaser game. In the US, it was a Prohibition-era shooter where you fought mobsters. It leaned heavily into the 1920s Chicago aesthetic. But looking closely at the graphics, the mobsters moved with strange, jerky animations and had exaggerated expressions. Why? Because the engine was likely repurposed from unreleased or prototype code intended for more comedic Japanese titles. The result was a game that felt like a fever dream of an American gangster movie interpreted by Japanese developers and then sold back to Americans. It was surreal, arcadey, and undeniably fun. Chapter 10, The Library of the Faithful, Defining Genres. We've talked about the mascots in the hardware. Now let's look at the specific genres where the Master System didn't just compete but arguably outclassed the NES. The RPG oasis. The NES had Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. These were titans, but they were also slow, menu-heavy, and graphically primitive. The Master System carved out a niche for RPGs that were faster, more visual, and more action-oriented. Golden Axe Warrior. Often dismissed as a Zelda clone, this game was actually a technical marvel. It took the Zelda formula but added smoother scrolling, better graphics, trees that actually looked like trees, and a darker, more atmospheric world based on the Golden Axe lore. For Master System owners, this wasn't a clone. It was their link to the past before the Super Nintendo even existed. YS, The Vanished Omens. Falcom's legendary action RPG found a perfect home on the Master System. With its bump combat system you attacked by ramming into enemies, it was fast-paced and perfect for a controller. The Master System's FM sound chip in supported regions made the YS soundtrack famous for its rock influences sing in a way the NES version struggled to match. The Sports Arena. Before EA Sports made the Genesis the king of sports games, the Master System was laying the groundwork. Great volleyball, great basketball, great football. The Great Series was hit or miss, but they were ambitious. They used large sprites and attempted more realistic perspectives than the abstraction often found on the NES. California games. This was the ubiquitous game of the late 80s. The Master System port is widely considered one of the best home versions. The colors were perfect for the sunny West Coast vibe. Surfing, BMX, and footbag hacky sack became competitive obsessions in living rooms across Europe and Brazil. It proved that the Master System could handle cool lifestyle games better than the kiddie Nintendo. The Disney Renaissance. Sega's partnership with Disney in the early 90s is legendary, usually associated with Aladdin on the Genesis. But it started on the Master System.
Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. This 8-bit version is distinct from the 16-bit Genesis game. It is not a port. It is a completely different game, and it is magnificent. The level design is tight, the graphics are adorable, and the mechanic of picking up and throwing blocks added a puzzle element to the platforming. Land of Illusion, the sequel, released late in the console's life, 1992, is arguably one of the best 8-bit platformers ever made. It featured an overworld map, branching paths, and new abilities for Mickey like a shrinking potion. It pushed the Z80 processor to its limit, displaying graphics that rivaled early Genesis titles. It remains a crown jewel of the library, often overlooked because it came out when the world was already playing Sonic 2. Chapter 11. The Twilight Years, a Guerrilla War in the Isles. By 1991, the 16-bit war was in full swing. The Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo were titans clashing on the world stage, their battles fought with blast processing and Mode 7 graphics. In this new world of parallax scrolling and CD-quality sound, an 8-bit console should have been an irrelevant relic. And yet, the Sega Master System refused to die. It entered its twilight years not with a whimper, but with a clever and surprisingly successful new strategy. It became the ultimate budget console. Sega of America, and especially Sega of Europe, realized they were sitting on a gold mine of proven technology. The hardware was cheap to manufacture, and there was a deep back catalog of excellent games. This led to the creation of the Sega Master System 2. The redesign, lean and mean. The Master System 2, released in 1990, was a masterclass in cost reduction. It was smaller, sleeker, with a curved top that echoed the design of the forthcoming Genesis. But the changes were more than cosmetic. To get the price down to the magic number of $99, Sega made some significant cuts. The card slot was gone. The unique credit card-sized Sega cards were a commercial failure. Removing the slot simplified the motherboard and reduced manufacturing costs. The reset button was removed. A seemingly minor omission, but it was another component that could be eliminated. Players now had to use the power switch to reset their games. AV ports were axed. The original Master System had a DIN port that could output a clean RGB video signal, the highest quality possible for the era. The Master System 2 was RF only, meaning it connected to the TV via the old-fashioned screw-in coax cable. The picture quality was a downgrade, but for the target market of kids with small bedroom TVs, it was good enough. A built-in game. The most brilliant move was removing the original BIOS, which contained the hidden Snail Maze game, and replacing it with a full retail game built directly into the console's memory. Depending on the region and the year, turning on a Master System 2 without a cartridge would instantly boot up either Alex Kidd and Miracle World, or later, the 8-bit version of Sonic the Hedgehog. This strategy transformed the Master System from a competitor into a brilliant flanker. While parents might balk at the $199 price tag of a SNES, a $99 Sega console with a fantastic game built in was an easy purchase for a younger child's birthday or Christmas. It became the perfect first console, hooking kids into the Sega ecosystem with the hope they would eventually graduate to a Genesis. The 8-bit Sonic, a technical miracle. The crown jewel of the Master System's twilight years was the 8-bit version of Sonic the Hedgehog. This was not a lazy port of the 16-bit classic. It was a completely different game, brilliantly designed from the ground up for the less powerful hardware. Developed by a small studio called Ancient, co-founded by legendary composer Yuzo Koshiro of Streets of Rage fame, the 8-bit Sonic was a marvel of design. Focus on platforming. Recognizing the Z80P CPU couldn't handle the physics-based loops of the Genesis version, the game focused more on intricate level design and careful platforming. Speed was still a factor, but it was more about navigating mazes and finding hidden paths. Different level themes. While some zone names were shared, Green Hill, Labyrinth, the level layouts and visuals were new. It introduced original zones like the sky-based Bridge Zone and the Industrial Jungle Zone. Chaos Emeralds as collectibles. Instead of being rewards for completing special stages, the Chaos Emeralds were hidden within the levels themselves, encouraging exploration and replayability. The 8-bit Sonic was a massive hit, especially in Europe and Brazil, proving that great game design could triumph over technical limitations. It was so successful that it spawned its own sequel, Sonic the Hedgehog 2,
also a completely different game from its Genesis counterpart, and other 8-bit exclusives like Sonic Chaos. These games kept the Master System relevant for years after it should have been obsolete. The European exclusives. Thanks to a sustained popularity in Europe, the Master System received a host of high-quality games in the 90s that never saw a North American release. European developers like the UK's Core Design, who would later create Tomb Raider, and France's Eidos Interactive pushed the hardware to its limits. Titles based on popular European comics like Asterix and the Smurfs were not cheap cash-ins. They were gorgeous, well-designed platformers that could stand alongside the best of the Japanese-developed titles. These region-exclusive games created a unique identity for the European Master System library, making it a treasure trove for modern collectors. Chapter 12. The Brazilian Miracle, the console that refused to die. All consoles eventually fade away. Production stops, shelves are cleared, and they pass into the realm of memory and retro collecting. All consoles, that is, except for one. In Brazil, the Sega Master System did not die. It did not fade. It became a permanent part of the cultural landscape, a story of business genius and national pride that has no parallel in the history of video games. The hero of this story is Tectoy. As we mentioned, their strategy of local manufacturing allowed them to sell the Master System at an affordable price, bypassing the crippling import tariffs that made foreign consoles a luxury item. But their true genius lay in how they managed the platform as a living, breathing entity for over 30 decades. Marketing to a nation. Tectoy understood the Brazilian market better than Sega ever could. They launched massive advertising campaigns, sponsored TV shows, and created a Sega Club that gave members newsletters and discounts. But their most effective tactic was localization that went beyond just translating text. Tectoy secured the license for Mauricio de Souza Productions, the creators of Brazil's most beloved comic book series, Mônica's Gang. Then, they took popular Sega games and completely reskinned them with these iconic characters. Wonder Boy in Monsterland became Mônica na Terra dos Monstros. The hero, Tom Tom, was replaced by Mônica, complete with her powerful stuffed bunny rabbit, Sansao, as a weapon. Safari Hunt was changed to feature the goofy ghost hunting characters from the comics. Even the 8-bit Sonic the Hedgehog was briefly re-released with Sonic Sprite replaced by the comic characters. This strategy was brilliant. It took internationally proven game designs and wrapped them in characters that were deeply loved by Brazilian children and their parents. A Tectoy Master System wasn't just a toy, it was a piece of Brazilian popular culture. Impossible ports and new creations. As the 90s wore on, Tectoy faced a problem. The world was playing 16-bit games like Street Fighter II, but many Brazilians could only afford an 8-bit Master System. Tectoy's solution was audacious. If the people couldn't upgrade to the 16-bit games, Tectoy would bring the 16-bit games down to the Master System. Their engineers performed miracles of demaking, creating 8-bit versions of games that should have been impossible. Street Fighter II, released in 1997, was a mind-boggling achievement. The graphics were simplified, the roster was cut to 8 characters, and the animation was choppy, but it was recognizably Street Fighter II. The core mechanics were there. For a kid in Brazil, it was a chance to play the biggest game in the world on the console they owned. Mortal Kombat 3. Tectoy also ported several Mortal Kombat titles, which were hugely popular. Original titles. Tectoy even commissioned entirely new games based on Brazilian properties, like a platformer based on the wooden puppet character Verias Frustradas do Pica-Pau. The ever-evolving hardware. Tectoy also kept the hardware line fresh with constant revisions. There was the Master System 3 Compact, which looked similar to the Master System 2, but came with new pack-in games. There was the Master System Super Compact, a tiny joypad-shaped console that transmitted its signal wirelessly to the TV, a feature that felt futuristic even by today's standards. They released a pink Master System Girl, targeted at young girls. Even into the 21st century, the product line continued. Tectoy released plug-and-play versions loaded with dozens of classic games, which are still sold today. The Master System has sold over 8 million units in Brazil, a number that continues to take upward. In Brazil, the Master System isn't retro, it's timeless.
Chapter 13. The Echo of the First Shot. Legacy and Conclusion.
So, how do we judge the Sega Master System? If we look at the raw numbers of the global market, it was a distant second place. It was a commercial failure in Japan and a footnote in North America. But to dismiss it as a simple loser is to miss the entire point of its story. The legacy of the Sega Master System is not one of victory, but of influence. It was the necessary failure that made Sega's future success possible. It was the training ground. The humiliating defeat at the hands of Nintendo in North America taught Sega everything it needed to know about its rival. It learned that hardware superiority was meaningless without great software. It learned that third-party support was essential. It learned that it could not trust outsiders with its marketing. And most importantly, it learned that it could not beat Nintendo by playing Nintendo's game. These painful lessons were the bedrock upon which the entire Genesis does what Nintendo strategy was built. Without the failure of the Master System, there would have been no Sonic, no Sega Scream, and no console war. It was the machine that built Sega's global empire. Its runaway success in Europe and Brazil established Sega as a household name in those regions, creating a generation of loyal fans who would later make the Mega Drive the dominant 16-bit console. It proved that the world of gaming was bigger than just Japan and America. It was a showcase of quiet brilliance. Its library is a treasure trove of 8-bit masterpieces that pushed the boundaries of the era. Games like Phantasy Star with its 3D dungeons, Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap with its revolutionary non-linear design, and the late-era Disney platformers proved that the hardware was capable of incredible things. It was a console that rewarded players with vibrant colors, arcade action, and a unique personality that was all its own. The story of the Sega Master System is a tale of two worlds. It is a story of a crushing defeat in one hemisphere and a decades-long reign as king in another. It is the story of the first challenger to step into the ring with the giant, the one who took the beating so the next contender would know how to fight. It may not have won the crown, but it was the console that taught Sega how to be a king. It was the first shot fired, and its echo would define the decade that followed. Thank you for tuning in to Retro Rewind. Stay plugged in.